This episode of the Card Insiders podcast is brought to you by OmniSend. OmniSend is a powerful marketing automation platform specifically built for e-commerce businesses. With easy-to-use visual automation workflows, customer segmentation, 24/7 support, multiple channels including SMS, and built-in integrations with key e-commerce platforms such as Shopify and Shopify Plus, BigCommerce, WooCommerce, and Magento, OmniSend enables marketers to effectively grow their business without costing a fortune. Who says marketing automation has to be expensive? Learn more about how OmniSend can help you maximize your data and grow your sales at omnisend.com. Welcome, everyone, to the Card Insiders podcast. I am your host, Greg Zakwitz. In Season 1 of the Card Insiders podcast, I am speaking with CEOs, founders, and marketing executives about the challenges of growing a business, lessons learned, and how they adapt to the constantly changing retail and consumer landscape. Whether you're an executive or someone in the front line of the day-to-day execution, you have a hand in helping your business grow, and I hope today's episode gives you added insight into making that happen. On today's episode, I welcome to the show the CEO of Toak Chocolate, James Le Compte. Welcome to the show, James. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here, Greg.
James, we're broadcasting from Ecuador today. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm in Quito, Ecuador, about almost 9,000 feet of elevation. So, it's a beautiful sunny day down here.
Very nice. How long have you been out there for?
I've been living in Ecuador for about 3 years, but coming back and forth for about 15 or so years. My wife is Ecuadorian and our 2 kids are half Ecuadorian. I'm originally from Australia myself, though.
Very nice. And so Ecuador is going to play a role into the conversation today, which is part of the reason I'm bringing it up, but two, it's just kind of fascinating as well. So always love the global aspect of podcasting and e-commerce as a whole. So James, I mentioned you're the CEO of Toak Chocolate. So real quick, let's just set the stage here. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who Toak Chocolate is, types of products you guys sell, how long you've been around, and just a general background from there, if you would.
Yeah, of course. So we started in 2014 down here in Ecuador. Our team is based largely in Ecuador. And Toak started initially actually out of a rainforest conservation project. So we have 3 co-founders. I'm a partner in the business, but our 3 co-founders, one of them, Jerry Toth, originally from Chicago. He came to Ecuador about 12 years ago and started a rainforest conservation program. And he, in the process of setting that project up, which today protects around 1,700 acres, or I think that's approximately 700 hectares of rainforest on coastal Ecuador. In the process of setting that up, he came across some abandoned cacao plantations. And he just got really fascinated with the cacao plant and in the process of learning how to make drinking chocolate the traditional way, which involves harvesting the cacao, fermenting, drying, roasting, grinding, etc. He was just blown away by the incredible flavor and aroma complexity and how different that was to his experience growing up in Chicago in terms of what chocolate had always been for him. This mass-produced, sugar-laden, sort of low cocoa or cacao content treat. And so that was really the initial spark to start Toak. And then getting together with Carl and Denise. Denise is originally from Quito, our 2 other co-founders. The 3 of them came across a remote valley in Ecuador where they met with 13 smallholder farmers. And these smallholder farmers were working with some really old cacao trees, and sort of in the research in setting up Toak, the team became really fascinated with this legendary variety of cacao called Nacional, which during the late 1800s and early 1900s was the most coveted or famed variety of cacao in the world. So all of the top European chocolatiers, for example, would source this particular variety in Ecuador because of its complex flavor and aroma profile. And unfortunately, around 1916, a disease came to Ecuador and decimated the entire industry. Up until that point, Ecuador was actually the world's largest exporter of cacao. And so if you can imagine, for a pretty small country to be the world's largest exporter of any commodity, it was a pretty big deal. And they say that modern Ecuador was built on the back of this cacao boom. And, people talk about the pepa de oro, the golden bean, which, really built modern Ecuador. But that all came to a sort of a grinding halt when this disease arrived called witch's broom. And basically, a long story short, over the course of the next 100 years, this variety went into decline and reached the point where people believe that it had basically become extinct. And when we met with these 13 smallholder farmers, they told us about, these cacao trees that were planted by their grandparents and their great-grandparents, almost kind of like children or extended family members. And, doing the math, we realized that many of them would have been planted before witch's broom arrived in Ecuador. And so we teamed up with some individuals at USDA laboratories in the US and with the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Project, and we basically did genetic testing on the trees. And we found that from a sample of 46 trees, 9 of them came back as 100% pure nacional, which was, this legendary variety that was supposedly extinct. And that was really, if you like, the start of, I guess, the second chapter in the Toak story, in the sense when we knew that we had something very unique and special, and we wanted to be quite careful about how we brought that, if you like, to the world in terms of a product. And so that's part of the reason, really, that we chose to follow a luxury branding strategy, which I think is pretty unique in the world of chocolate, because most of us consider chocolate to be a candy, or that's what we've been brought up to believe. When in fact, in Ecuador, for example, there's evidence of cultures using cacao and domesticating it more than 5,300 years ago. We know, that the Incas and the Mayans and the Aztecs considered cacao something very precious and valuable in their cultures. And also when, cacao first arrived in Europe, it was really the ultimate luxury good that was only available to royal families and the nobility, etc. So, working with something very precious as a raw material, and in an industry that hadn't seen a lot of change for a long time, and particularly an industry that was stacked against the interests of the farmers, we saw an opportunity to take a different approach with a luxury branding strategy and build the type of brand that, we would feel proud of being part of, in terms of, how we work with the different actors in the value chain and how we portray cacao and the value that it can offer. So that's a little bit of background, and happy to also mention a few of the products that we have.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I'm assuming the climate is the desirable one for growing cacao. Is that correct? I'm assuming with such a small country being a major exporter of this back when, it's climate driven. Is that a fair assumption to make on my part?
Yeah, definitely. So cacao really only thrives around the tropics. And obviously Ecuador gets its name from being straddling the equator. Mm-hmm. And in Ecuador, we have, an incredible ecosystem. It's one of the mega diverse countries on the planet. We have, in a really small footprint, we have the Amazon rainforest, the Andes mountain range, coastal tropical rainforests, and then the Galapagos Islands. We actually released earlier this year the world's first single origin Galapagos cacao or chocolate bar. And that's also got a really nice conservation story to it. But it's definitely the climate that gives Ecuador such a incredibly rich cacao.
So the other question there is, you mentioned about these 9 plants or trees that were thought to be extinct, and they're, completely pure or whatever. So taste profile is going to be a little bit difficult on a podcast, but let's compare the taste profile of that to, say, the run of the mill. Sure. You mentioned the sweets that we all like, a Hershey bar that everyone, like this commoditized piece of tree. Like, what's the taste profile between that and something else?
So I guess there's a few analogies we could use. I kind of like the analogy of when I was, a child in the 80s, and I guess, we all were encouraged to eat our vegetables. Iceberg lettuce was like the big lettuce or the only lettuce that was available. And to me, it's kind of like a really one-dimensional flavor experience. And now, when sort of as things have evolved, there's now like an incredible selection of different greens and lettuces that you can get, heirloom varieties and organic, etc. And so to me, kind of, a traditional candy bar is something where, the producer is really, what they're doing is, first of all, they're starting with very low quality or low grade cacao. And then what they're doing is they're trying to create a consistent profile from one product to the next. And so what they're doing is they're adding tons of other ingredients, whether it's refined sugar or lecithin or, other ingredients that you can't even sort of make out on the back of the label. And they're doing that to hide a lot of the imperfections. And also they're working with a natural product that naturally varies from season to season, but they're trying to iron out that variation by over-engineering it or sort of over-processing it, if you like. On the contrary, I always like to say if anyone's looking for a quality bar of chocolate, the best thing to do is to turn the label around and look at the back of the bar and look for chocolate bars that have only 2 or 3 ingredients. The reason is that if you're using really fine flavor cacao beans, you actually want to highlight those beans rather than sort of covering them with all sorts of other ingredients. And so anyone that's making chocolate, we make chocolate with only 2 ingredients and sometimes only with 1 ingredient for our 100% bars or powders. But for anyone that's making chocolate with 2 or 3 ingredients, and that's usually a good signal that they're working with fine flavor cacao beans and that they're actually trying their best to preserve the complexity of flavor that's inherent in those beans. Another way of sort of thinking about it as well is it's a bit like a good wine. When you're sipping on or enjoying a good wine, the flavor evolves in your mouth, as you're breathing in and out through your nose. You might, for example, start with, let's say with a chocolate bar, it might start off with really nutty characteristics, and then you might get a peak of sort of some acidic berries or red berries, and then maybe it would finish with some earthy chocolatey notes. And so if you're eating a candy bar, it's usually just very one-dimensional flavor profile, like lots of sugar and very traditional chocolatey notes, but none of the additional complexity that is found in a cacao bean. A cacao bean actually has, on average, around 700 different individual flavor compounds. And so, there's a lot for us to explore.
Very interesting. I'm going to ask you about a good product to start with later in the conversation. So if anyone's interested, hang on to the conversation here, and we'll get you some recommendations about good places to start. And I'm going to order one and try it myself. So it's a half personal ask here. You mentioned you guys are a luxury retailer. You've taken that approach. So if you look at your website from a pricing standpoint, but just the overall presentation with the unboxing, very elaborate, very, high level. So can you briefly describe who your typical customer is? Obviously, it's going to be, higher price point on here, but who are you going after, James?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's, the beauty on the one hand of having a e-commerce driven brand is that, you can really be you can dream big in terms of who you're going after in terms of your target audience. And that's important with a luxury brand, because traditionally luxury brands relied a lot on physical retail space. And that was something as a startup that we didn't have the resources to do. So the consumers that we try and target, I think, are really at a general level, they're curious consumers. So they're looking for innovative or creative brands that are reimagining or rethinking a particular vertical or category. And I can sort of talk a little bit about that, if you like, in terms of the innovation we've done around barrel aging chocolate, a little bit inspired by whiskey or wine. I think we also, we really try and target conscious consumers, because we work very closely with the community that we harvest the cacao from. We pay them between 3 to 8 times the local market price for their cacao, which is, far and beyond the fair trade price. And we also have a conservation initiative where we're working with a local Ecuadorian conservation NGO on a genetic bank where we're basically preserving flavor diversity, if you like, for future generations through protecting heirloom varieties of cacao. So I think, both curious and conscious consumers are attracted to our brand. And then definitely consumers who are looking for experiences, whether that's for gifting. That's a big driver of sales for us, special occasion gifts. We just had a nice bump recently for Father's and just before that Mother's Day. But it could be, an anniversary gift, and even something like a dinner party gift. People, bring out chocolate as an alternative to, a traditional bottle of wine, because it has a nice story behind it and it's very experiential in terms of the unboxing and, the way that we create analogies between wine tasting and chocolate tasting. So it's something that people can discover, if you like, as a new experience. And then sort of demographically speaking, our biggest market is the US, followed by Europe, and it's mostly individuals sort of that are 30 plus age bracket.
Very nice. I'm going to ask you about the whiskey. I saw a tequila flavor profile in there as well. So I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later as well. We'll probably wrap the product conversation into one, so we're not going on tangents all over, which I love tangents. So I want to follow back on you. You had this really beautiful story about kind of how it's conceived and how you have a conservation focus to it, how you're ethically treating farmers and things like that. So this connection. But when it comes to marketing channels, I could see this being quite challenging, right? So if you're doing paid search advertising or paid social, it's certainly harder to tell a story in a couple words or a sentence, things like this. So are you guys finding a challenge with trying to tell this story about how to differentiate yourself and the quality of the product with your digital marketing channels? You know, is there more complexity there where, hey, you need to get them in, we need to get them emails, we have this welcome series going out to them. Like, how are you guys telling the story and finding the balance here between acquiring customers and being able to communicate your differentiators? Can you share a little light on that if you could, James?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. You only have people's attention span for a very short period, and there's no way we could sort of show them all the layers of, interesting stories with respect to the brand in that short introductory opportunity. So I think what we use to our advantage in that sense, in kind of like the first impression, is we're very design driven and have a strong visual identity. And so that translates well in terms of, social and paid advertising in the sense of, catching people's attention. So our flagship line of products, which we call our Origin bars, they retail for around about $200 a unit. And they come in a beautifully handcrafted wooden box. It comes with a 60-page color book that talks about the history of cacao in Ecuador, how chocolate is made, about how to do chocolate tasting, etc. And that's something that's quite visually stunning. And so it jumps out on a page. And I think when people see a chocolate presented like that, then it sort of makes them stop for a moment and, look into it a little bit further. Then we do fortunately have a really rich brand story. I think the challenge we find sometimes is, how do you best tell that brand story online, given there's so many different channels? How do you do it in an organized or logical sense? And it's just a little bit harder to do it online versus an in-store interaction where you can sort of gauge what the consumer is interested in and have it more as a two-way conversation. I think that's part of the challenge we face as a storytelling brand, is how do we best do that online?
Have you guys found surprising success with any particular channel with being able to convey that? I think you gave a really nice answer with the visuals can certainly capture someone's attention from a marketing standpoint. But have you guys found surprising success with any particular channel, whether it's email, paid search, paid social, whatever it might be, that maybe you were not expecting to have such good success with for any particular reason?
Yeah, I think we actually, as a brand, have only recently started to invest more in, let's say, paid digital marketing. Partly that was brought on because of the COVID crisis and, our distribution channels to physical retail stores almost dried up completely. And, I like to think that obviously there's been a huge amount of suffering out of this crisis, but hopefully there's also some good that comes out of it. And so just in our own small example, it's forced us to really reevaluate business model. And I think we were being a little bit relaxed about digital presence, and that happens to be our biggest share of revenue. And so it forced us to kind of review that and to look at how we could better leverage digital. And so some things that have worked really well for us recently, we've started doing, online reviews for our product with Trustpilot in this case. And we found that that's been an incredible way to capture customer feedback that we can then repurpose on email automations, email campaigns, on our social channels. And soon we'll also update that on our website. So that was a really nice surprise. We also, I guess it's not necessarily a digital strategy per se, but we've had some really good results in the past with PR. So we have a PR agency we work with in Chicago that's, done some great things for us, and that drives brand awareness and traffic, and sort of creates that introduction to the brand that we can then, start to nurture over time. And then a new area that I'm pretty excited to get into, and we're just starting to explore at the moment, is this Google Web Stories. There's a company called Storify Me that we're exploring how we can leverage that. So my understanding is it's a bit like Google's answer to Instagram Stories, and that there's some really exciting opportunities there since it's a pretty new platform for Google.
Very cool. You mentioned that you guys were a little bit lax on the digital side, and I want to follow up on that quickly. Is there a particular reason? I know you guys are found in brick and mortars all throughout the U.S., Neiman Marcus, things like that. So certainly you had that channel working for you, and you mentioned the complexities with COVID. Is there a particular reason you guys didn't have such a large focus on the digital side of things, or was it more of a natural occurrence of focusing on retail distribution outlets?
I think, we're a small team. We only have 9 individuals on the team, and some of us are part-time. Some of that number is part-time. But I think maybe what we found is that we need to have a shift in mindset from sort of like this set and forget mentality that we had in the past with digital to something that's like a continual body of work. Like, even there, I don't know, there are just so many layers of detail that we've been discovering. We have our store on Shopify, and they have a great content delivery network so that our page loads pretty quickly. But we've only, been doing like the bare minimum when it comes to, if you like, optimizing our images, I think. So, and these days, there's so many different devices that people are using, and, different screen sizes and different internet connections and all of that. And so looking at something like the platforms like Cloudinary or Cloud Image and things like that, those are like projects in themselves to get ourselves set up so that we're really optimizing image delivery in terms of, page load speed, which impacts our Google search results and our conversion rate. Because of the online customer experience, people drop off if a page takes too long to load, for example. And so I think there's so many different areas of your digital presence that you can sort of turn into mini projects. We're setting up a AMP version of our website at the moment as well, so that when people are browsing on mobile, it loads sort of instantly, which is also going to help our Google page speed and online experiences, etc. So I think it's that sort of shift from, wow, we've built, version 2 or version 3 of our website. That was a big project. Now let's sort of turn our mind to something else, versus, this is like our storefront, or one of them, and we need to be continually sort of tweaking and investigating how we can improve it.
Yeah, the rabbit hole is real. That is for sure. I appreciate the thoughtful answer there, though. You look at you being a CEO, and you're obviously responsible for growing the brand. And we look at, challenges you've had to overcome. You mentioned just the most recent one that we're still going through is COVID. What would you say, if you look back over the last couple of years, what your number one challenge for growing the brand? What do you think that's been?
I think, in our case, we're perhaps a little bit unique because we're a luxury food brand that's based in Ecuador with a target market in the US and Europe. And so traditionally, one of our biggest challenges has been really making those connections with consumers in a geography that we're not in. But of course, we can overcome that with digital tools. And then I think related to that, we have a proposition which is pretty radical in the industry that we're in terms of, chocolate bars that range from $25 up to, we have one edition, our art series, which comes with a limited edition art piece from Ecuador's most renowned modern artist, and that one retails for $450. So, we do really have to try and, I guess, first of all, target the right audience, and then create pretty quickly an initial connection with them, where they're curious enough to learn more. And then when they do learn more about all of the things behind the brand, we're able to create a nice relationship with our customers.
Very good. If you want to send me that 451 as a thank you gift, I'm not going to stop you, James. Just going to throw it out there.
It's waiting in the mail. Yeah, I'll have to check.
It got lost in the mail, Greg. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to shift from a challenge to kind of a fear, for lack of a better term. But your fears are probably same as mine. They're a lot different than business. But if you look at the e-commerce industry as a whole, or even your specific vertical within it, whatever it might be, like what's the one thing you would point to that maybe keeps you up at night?
I think one of the things that I'm always curious or trying to understand better is, I guess, what are our customers' motivations when they buy a bar of Toak chocolate, and what would motivate them to repeat purchase? And just that, I guess while there's so many benefits of having a digital forward business strategy or business model, you also have to work extra hard, I think, to create dialogue with customers, because it's far different to someone walking into your chocolate shop and you being able to have just like a little side conversation with them and intuitively understanding like what their motivations are. I find it's not as easy to do that. So I'm always curious to try and find ways to sort of have a conversation with customers without being pushy or intrusive, because a lot of people, I think, look at online purchases as being more transactional in nature rather than, conversational. So yeah, that's something that I'm always thinking, how can we improve in that area in terms of being able to have more dialogue with our customers?
Very good. And yeah, I think it's a challenge for a lot of retailers to figure out how to talk to customers. I know a couple that will literally they see a big order come through and they'll just call them and be like, hey, thanks for your order. Just want to, talk to you a little bit about it. But it is challenging. I would imagine that, someone's calling me, I don't know, someone called me during the podcast here, but like if I wasn't on the talking to you, I probably would have just rejected the phone call. Right. So I think there's definitely that, not only a transactional feel to it, but just a general distancing feel with, I'm assuming it's a telemarketer calling me or something.
Yeah.
So I've got to imagine that's got to be difficult to, even if you make a concerted effort to reach out, that someone's going to take that phone call. Look at, not to put your marketing team on notice, but I look at, you're obviously in a leadership position, but people listening to this maybe not in a leadership position or want to get to one at some point. Maybe they're a little more entry level or mid-tier. If I pick you up and I put you into the midst of your marketing department right now, assuming you're either, entry to mid-tier, like what's the one thing you would do? Is there a specific area of focus you would say, all right, this is where I think we have the best chance for success or best bang for the buck to kind of move your business forward? Is there something you could point to that you would probably start working on right away?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's nice to try and, I guess, put yourself in other people's shoes. I think it's a good exercise. I think when you're part of a team, I really appreciate when people are sort of taking initiative and perhaps testing ideas and then bringing them to the broader team with a little bit of evidence behind it. So if people are motivated to, I guess, like this idea of sort of trying and failing fast, like, I think if someone were, in a marketing team and was testing new, I guess, approaches for conversion optimization or for post-purchase sort of retention of customers and repeat purchase, I think there's a lot of things that you can play around with to push the needle, so to speak. And so, yeah, it's not a very concrete example, I guess, but I guess just the idea of being curious about what if I change this or introduce this, am I going to see any change, and being, confident enough to test some of those changes and bring them to the broader team. Not sure if that answered the question.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and anyone on your marketing team is listening to this now has to go start testing. James told me I should. I want to bring up, because it seems like it's a natural extension for Toak chocolate and kind of the ethos behind the brand, but you're part of a new venture Origin.io.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that is? Because I think there's a lot of overlap between Toak chocolate, but like I mentioned, the ethos behind it. So can you mention to the audience a little bit about what that is and how it kind of relates to Toak chocolate?
Yeah, definitely. So Origin, which is spelled with a J, so that actually, it's a tech startup that was built by companies and individuals here in Ecuador in the fine chocolate and specialty coffee space. And it really came about because as a brand, Toak, as we've discussed, is very driven by storytelling and also by our strong interests in social and environmental impact. And we were looking to bring out a new product line that was a little more minimalistic in packaging versus the Origin bars I mentioned that come with the wooden box and 60-page color book, etc. But we didn't want to minimalize, if you like, the storytelling element, and we also wanted to try and increase the transparency level in terms of how we source the cacao and how it's transformed and how we work with the different actors along the value chain. We were basically looking for a technology or software solution to help us do that, in the sense of tell the product and brand story to consumers in a digital sense, but to do it with authentic data that we were generating or collecting in the farming and production phases of the product. But we couldn't find anything that really met that need. We could find platforms that were built to tell brand stories, but they were sort of essentially like content management systems, in the sense that anyone sitting in New York or London or Sydney could be putting data in about how ethical this product was, how ethically it was developed, and pictures of farmers and things like that. But that just didn't really feel right, that somebody sitting anywhere in the world would be sort of putting whatever data they wanted in there, even if it's built on blockchain, which people sort of somehow, I think there's this sense that anything that's built on blockchain must contain the truth. And so, we found a few examples of those platforms and weren't really satisfied with them. And then we also found some platforms that were really robust supply chain or traceability platforms, but they didn't have any consumer interface to, really, if you like, surface some of that data and tell it in a beautiful, engaging way to consumers. So that was a need that we identified at Toak, and then a few other like-minded brands in Ecuador also expressed an interest or a need there. And so we basically got together as a number of chocolate brands and coffee brands, including República del Cacao, Café Beles, Hoja Verde, and started to work on a minimum viable product. So it's set up as a separate company, but really the idea behind it is to pick up on this trend that consumers are increasingly keen to know where their food or even, cosmetics or clothing, etc., where it comes from and how it's transformed, and is it transformed in a way that creates positive impact, or at least it doesn't create harm at the level of, the environment or the communities that work in the value chain. And when we were building Origin, we also were really conscious, because we've worked with a lot of certification programs like organic and fair trade, etc. We were conscious of not building something that was sort of created like an obligation or an onus on the farmers and the cooperatives and other actors in the supply chain. We wanted to build a tool that would add value to everyone in the supply chain. So Origin actually brings some of the benefits of like big data farming tech to the smallholder farmer. So they're able to track productivity and manage quality at the farm level, but also collect data points that would be adding value to the finished product through the digital storytelling. So yeah, it's an exciting new venture, and it's something that we're focusing initially on coffee and chocolate, but it's applicable to really any product that you can imagine. I mean, if you're using cosmetics or a fine wine or whatever it might be, people are more and more curious about where it comes from and what impact it's having on the environment or the communities that produce it.
Do you think this is going to be more of a necessity for mid to market or mid market to higher end and luxury retailers? Because no matter what, it helps tell a brand story, but it also adds to the perceived value of said product. Do you think it's going to be more and more required as consumers start demanding this more of these the higher end and luxury retailers?
Yeah, I think that's our vision, is that, today it's something that consumers talk a lot about or increasingly about, but don't necessarily always take let's say, the time or the effort to dig up the information that would sort of confirm whether a product aligns with their value system or not. In some cases, because that information is really hard to find. I mean, if you go to a traditional company website, you find often, a lot of generic marketing and product information about a chocolate bar or a bottle of wine, but you don't find a lot of information about how it was produced and, the ethical and environmental sort of standards, etc. So yeah, we definitely think it's going to follow the trend of something like organic, which was very niche in the beginning, but increasingly, we see now organic products in the aisles of mainstream supermarkets, and it's I guess a category or a term that is universally understood now. So yeah, we like to think that it is going to be something that today can be a really important or an exciting differentiator for a brand, but eventually it's going to be the type of thing, just like, having an e-commerce platform was, 10 or 15 years ago, was sort of something that only a handful of brands were truly doing. Today it's sort of like a necessity if you want to do business. So yeah, we have the belief that it is going to move in that direction.
Very nice. So I'm going to get you out of here with two last questions here. First one, you're a leader in a couple different capacities. So with Origin and Toak chocolate. So looking at for others who are looking to become more effective leaders, what is like one resounding piece of advice you might give to them to help them become more effective leaders?
I think it's all about, I guess, the human interactions in leadership. So, I really enjoy and thrive off networking. Through networking, that's sort of like an external activity, I guess, but you're able to listen to a lot of other leaders and fascinating people. And then I guess internally, I think a really, good practice is to, if you like, sort of pass the baton and to have others in your team take the lead in different circumstances. Really, I think encourages growth, and there's no way that any one individual in a company has all of the answers anyway. So it's perhaps more of a sort of a facilitatory role in terms of giving other people like the podium at the right time to take the lead in different areas of the business.
Very nice piece of advice. And the final one today, I mentioned we would get into kind of if you want to start with a more higher end chocolate, get a more true taste to it. So let's go with a couple different things here. One, if you're used to eating Hershey bars or kind of that commoditized chocolate, like myself, and I want to order from you guys and kind of get the starter kit, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
What's the piece of chocolate you would recommend to start with? And let's go from like maybe a milk chocolate side and a dark chocolate side.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the piece you would start with? And you mentioned kind of these flavor profiles for maybe someone that is more familiar with it or wants to try a different taste to their palate. You miss whiskey profile, and saw on the website like a tequila profile. So one, where do we get started?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to dab into that. And then two, just briefly touch on kind of these flavor profiles that you guys are experimenting with.
Sure. So I think if it's the first introduction to Toak or to fine chocolate, we have a really cool product line, which are our mini bar selections. And so we have one product, for example, which has 6 different editions in it, 3 mini bars of each edition. So it's 18 mini bars in total. It's a really fantastic product if you want to sit down with your partner or friends and just go through like an end-to-end chocolate tasting experience. And so you'll find in that product really an example of what Toak shines at, which, so we have 2 different styles of chocolate making. One of them we call our harvest style. And so you can think of that a bit like your favorite wine. So we harvest our cacao annually. and then we produce it into different harvest releases. And so in this minibar selection, you can try essentially a vertical flight of different harvest years. So you'll find a chocolate that was made with cacao from the 2015, 2016, and 2017 harvest. And it's really fascinating, the difference between the harvest years, because cacao comes from the Theobroma cacao plant, which, itself is heavily influenced by nature and the weather conditions. So you'll find that the amount of rainfall, the sunlight, the soil nutrients, all of those things change regularly, and they have a big bearing on the flavor profile and aroma. And for example, 2016 was the year of the El Nino weather phenomenon down here in Ecuador. And so that particular year was really unique, and you'll find it comes out with sort of more floral notes on the chocolate. It's got an earthier profile to it as well. So that's a really great way of just trying pure dark chocolate that's made in the style of a fine wine. And then in the same product, you'll also find 3 examples of our aged style of chocolate. So Toak has really pioneered this whole concept of aging chocolate. We've been aging chocolate in different barrels and with different specialty aromas for upwards of 5 years at the moment. We did research with Washington State University with their oenology team, and they think that we can age our chocolate for 20 plus years. So you can, try the world's oldest aged chocolate with this product. And we have, for example, chocolate that's been aged for 3 years in a Don Julio tequila cask, or for 2 years in a Woodford Reserve bourbon barrel. We have a Lafroig single malt Isla whiskey cask, which is stunning. And then, we also aged with some other specialty aromas like different types of aromatic wood from Ecuador, or Kampot pepper from Cambodia, etc. So really, what it does is basically the quick explanation behind it is that the cacao butter, which is naturally found in the cacao bean, that has an aroma absorbing property. And over the sort of passage of time, it gradually absorbs the aroma of the empty liquor cask or barrel. And then when that melts on your palate, so cacao butter has this, it's kind of like one of nature's little tricks that make, chocolate so enjoyable, is that cacao butter has a melting point at body temperature. And so when you let the chocolate melt in your mouth, which is what you should do with a good quality chocolate, that starts to release like the notes of the whiskey or the tequila. It's really subtle but well integrated flavor experience with the chocolate. You have to try to understand.
Very nice. Very nice. I drink Don Julio as well, so I should probably get on that. All right. Final question. I've kept you way too long, James. So final question. Storing your chocolate, should it be room temperature in the fridge or in the freezer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Try and avoid at all costs storing your chocolate in the fridge or the freezer if it's good quality chocolate. What happens is you kind of reverse the last step of the chocolate making process, which is tempering the chocolate bars.
Okay.
And usually if you put chocolate in the fridge, you'll find that it starts to develop like a little white layer. And so that's the fat blooming. The tempering process joins the fats, solids, and sugars into one uniform sort of material, if you like, and that's why it melts nicely on your palate. If you're going to put it in the fridge, then it's just not going to melt as nicely in your mouth. It won't destroy it, but it's just not such a nice experience. So the best way to think of storing chocolate is like how you would store your best wine. So in a cool, dark, dry environment. And I don't work well in Fahrenheit. I use Celsius, but preferably not above like 23, 24 degrees Celsius. Then it starts to, get exposed to heat, which can melt it.
I don't work well in Celsius, but I have Google. It takes care of all my problems.
Right. Thank goodness for Google.
Very nice, James. So I've really enjoyed the conversation today. I think you gave a lot of not only great background, but great advice for us as well. In the episode description, we will have contact info for you and or your company as well. But if someone does want to reach out, James, what's the best way for them to get a hold of either you, the company, so web addresses, kind of give us the whole spiel, if you will.
Yeah, perfect. So Toak Chocolate, TOAK chocolate.com. Origin is ORIJIN.io. I'm actually, I really enjoy, if you like, sort of monitoring and responding to customer inquiries at Toak through our hello@toakchocolate.com. So you can always find me there, but I'm also happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. If you just look me up on LinkedIn and send me a connection request, I'm more than happy to catch up that way as well.
Excellent. James, thank you very much for your time today. To everyone listening, thank you for yours. And until next time, have a great day and be kind to one another.